October 1st through November 12th, 2025, longest government shutdown in U.S. history, lasting 43 days. The effects on Americans were widespread. It impacted many areas of daily life. And let's talk about the major things affected, how you can prepare for the future. Because, January 30th means that you got less than 75 days to do anything that has to do with physical prep, mental prep, making things are secure and ready to rock and roll. Let's just talk about one of the most major things that was affected: air travel and transportation. It was not a hidden fact. It was not a rumor, but flight disruptions, delays, and cancellations were crazy rampant during the government shutdown. The FAA was affected. Air traffic controllers were calling out. TSA agents weren't available. There were staff shortages in numerous amounts of areas. And this also had to do with safety precautions that were needed by ancillary employees. So people that still work for the FAA, some of them getting paid, some of them not, which is weird. One of my buddies works for the FAA as an inspector. He goes from city to city, make sure the air traffic controller towers are doing what they're supposed to do. He was getting paid, but the controllers weren't. It's weird. It was just a whole kerfuffle going on. And when it came to that stuff, and that was probably one of the most major things that affected a lot of Americans, millions of Americans. Let's talk about folks that was a little bit less than a million: federal workers and contractors. If we're talking about federal workers, probably a little bit south of 900,000 of them were furloughed, or they were in some type of status where they still had to work, where they were accepted or they were exempted. Now, if they were exempted, they were still getting paid. VA employees, some GSA employees, if you had working capital funds, if you had the type of funding, whether it was 2-year money or you had working capital funds, which allow for you to continue to work and still get paid, you were exempted. If you were accepted, that means that you were working without pay. Basically, all of the Department of War, with the exception of a few job categories, a lot of Health and Human Services, USDA, a lot of folks were working as accepted employees. And then there was furloughed folks who were just at the house kicking it. That's a disruption in a lot of different stuff. If you depend on federal employees, or you yourself are a federal employee, a lot of things were disrupted without even really realizing it. Social Security Administration offices on alternate schedules or completely closed. You're unable to get physical documents that you need. Passport offices affected. You still were able to go in for your global entry and your TSA pre-check appointments, but those employees interviewing you, they weren't getting paid. So those staff shortages, people working without pay, influences the economy, which we'll talk about here in a second. But those missed paychecks, those employees have since gotten their pay back. But in the meantime, that was money not being spent. So fortunately, most folks got their back pay. But just thinking about when it comes to travel, when it comes to those employees and contractors. Now, I don't even know if contractors getting back pay. If you're a federal contractor, you're working adjacent to government employees, or you're working for contracts that were dependent on pay, I don't know how that works. Federal contractors were not guaranteed back pay, and that's that law that passed in 2019. So that's a big impact as well. And then we got public services and access. Now, we talked about national parks, the Smithsonian museums, the National Zoo, all closed. So if you already had planned tourism, you already lived in those areas, or you were going to be going on national parks, those were unavailable. Now, there were some national parks you could still go to, and some people found it nice to not have to be, pestered by national park employees, because many of them were furloughed. But lock picking services, not available. Your kid gets locked in a bathroom. The lock picker, right? He was not being paid. He was furloughed. So they would have to have someone come in to get your kiddo out of a bathroom, hypothetically, right? Government offices. So government offices, where normally you would have public services, they were slowed down processing different stuff. I've already mentioned that when it came to federal employees. You got to plan for that for the future, just in case you need them. And then let's just talk about like the socioeconomic impacts. The big kerfuffle, I made plenty of videos on the food assistance program, the SNAP program, how folks weren't getting paid. Folks weren't getting their money, how the administration fought from paying it. That was, if your opinions on that I'm going to leave that for you. But when Millions, billions of dollars of food stamps were not being funded. That money was not being pumped into the economy, at least for those weeks when they were unavailable. Bodegas, grocery stores, local grocery stores, people that would normally spend their benefits in those areas weren't doing it. So not only are the low income people, right, don't have the money, but the actual businesses weren't being supplemented as well from the money they're normally used to getting. A lot of people didn't talk about this, but the heating assistance program, the funding for the low income home energy assistance program was halted right as cold weather began, and that put some households at risk. Now, granted, it is still fall. Winter is coming, okay, as they would say in Game of Thrones. But I would say that program being halted was probably not the biggest, because that only really affects a lot of people in the Northeast or the Pacific Northwest or maybe the Plains, maybe not here in Texas, but that's still something to think about as well. And then with the broader economy, I mean, reduced consumer spending, halted new contracts, lower consumer sentiment, all those things were impacted. Some people who absolutely don't have anything directly to do with the government weren't spending their money as much. Uncertainty causes disruption. That causes consumer confidence to drop, means that people spend less money. Federal employees and contractors are unpaid, spending in those stores and on transportation services and in restaurants. In particular areas with a large federal presence drop like a rock. Alexandria, Virginia, Washington, D.C., Huntsville, Alabama, Dallas-Fort Worth Metroplex, San Diego, all those places where there's a lot of federal employees, spending came down. That halted economic spending in those areas, halting new contracts. If you were expecting for a task order on one of your contracts to be executed by a government contracting officer, probably didn't happen. If you're expecting payments for some stuff to happen, some of the payment offices were closed. Your payments could have been delayed. We may now be paying interest to some companies because the government, we have to do what's called net 30. We normally, when a contractor submits an invoice that we accept, we normally got 30 days to pay it. If we didn't pay that, we owe companies interest. And so that affects private businesses like the big companies like the Deloittes of the world, the KPMGs, but the Boeings, etc. But the small mom and pop shops who are doing gizmos and gadgets, and they're submitting those payments and they're waiting for it from the guy that fixes a fence on a government property. He's waiting for payment to be done all the way up to the big old folks like Lockheed Martin. Payments delayed is something that's big. So those are the major areas that were affected. How do you prep for January 30th? All these categories don't pertain to you. You may not be a federal employee. You may not be getting assistance. You may not have a grocery store. You're waiting for SNAP. That may not affect you, but there are still areas where you should still prepare yourself, because there are so many areas. If you examine your own life and your prep and you see where the government is a part of that, right? If you know you need to depend on yourself more, stockpiling food, it is going to be damn near impossible for federal employees or contractors to stack up savings by January 30th that can take care of the months of February and March. But you may have to try to look to do that. Maybe spend less on Christmas, which sucks to even say. But when it comes to, you have elderly parents or yourself are getting older and you're going to be looking to go to the Social Security Administration office, maybe try to get that done now, December or early January, because it may be harder to do. Apply for those passports as soon as you can. Go for your interviews with government offices as soon as possible. You're going for a security clearance, see if you can expedite that paperwork. If a job is depending on that, whether it's government or it's a contractor, you need to think about that stuff as well. Heating assistance programs. So SNAP was fully funded through September 30th. So if the government shuts down on September 30th, SNAP won't be affected this time. But the heating assistance program, I don't know about that. I don't know if that was fully funded. So in those areas, if you have a neighbor or you yourself dependent on the supplement to help pay the bills so you can make sure your heater stays on, you might look to invest in power stations, into heaters, or maybe even staying with a loved one or a friend if it gets that bad, because next government shutdown will be in winter, none of this fall shit. So those are things to think about as well. The economic impact. Do you do the same amount of consumer spending that you intended to do during the rest of this holiday season? As we transition to January, people are going to be turning on gym memberships for New Year's resolutions, and they're going to be planning travel, and they're going to be doing all sorts of stuff, trying to prep their homes to sell in the spring. That stuff may slow down. So all I can say is you examine what you need to do. It's things I have to do even for myself. You know, how things that were kind of effective for me, I have VA appointments and stuff that weren't affected at all. VA employees were getting paid, but things that were like attached to them was very much slowed down. If they were sending me off to get x-rays to a VA clinic, to a non-VA clinic, some of that stuff got delayed or canceled. So just think about, as we run up, as you think about how can you more depend on yourself with less than 75 days to go before the next vote needs to be done, then you might want to look into that, because they still have not figured out these subsidies when it comes to healthcare. That's why it got shut down in the first place. People are going to be looking, by people I mean Congress, who doesn't miss a paycheck, may be looking to take a stance in January that is completely unexpected. First time stopping by, hit the subscribe button. I would love to have you a part of the battalion. Comment down below, what do you think could be effective for the next shutdown? Is something that I'm missing that I didn't even make an assessment on? We're going to have plenty of stuff going on with our Department of Defense. I didn't even mention the military, where we had to pull money from research and development and figure out how to pay them. And now R&D is it's a headache. And with 10% of our Navy being in the Caribbean, us doing stuff in Northern Africa and Sudan, Mali's about to be taken over by terrorists. There's so much going on in the world. I don't want you to forget how important it is domestically and to keep America first and thinking about everything that you do. If this is not your first time stopping by, well, thank you once again for watching me run my grape. For everyone else, we'll speak soon.